There's a lot of different ways to love a game, and every game is loved in its own way, even when compared to rivals in its genre. I love both Skyrim and Cyberpunk 2077, but despite them both fitting into the same basic action-adventure RPG genre, I love them for totally separate reasons. For the people who are in deep enough with the lore of my channel, you'll know how much I love the delightfully weird prog-based battle royale Vampire the Masquerade's Blood Hunt, and you'll know that I love it because it's a good, well-made game, but also because the entire premise and notion of its creation is entirely absurd, and that absurdity gives the game a delightful level of charm that it wouldn't otherwise have. And so today, I would like to tell you a similar story, one set entirely within that realm of absurdity. Because there's no way anyone could ever have expected RoboCop Rogue City to even exist, much less be an absolute masterpiece. Okay, so I've tried writing this script a few times, and the same problem always emerges. I genuinely have no idea where I'm supposed to start with this one. There's just so many things bouncing around in my head that I feel the need to say, and trying to figure out where to start with them has proved difficult. So let me just tell you a story. I've got this group of friends that I play D&D with on the weekends, except for the weekends where we don't play D&D. Sometimes we just enjoy being around one another and watch shows or play other games, and it was on one of these days where one of my friends, after a conversation about the 80s and comics, asked if I'd seen the new RoboCop game. Now, despite my love of the musics and the aesthetics of the decade, the cinema from the 80s is something that I've never really explored that much, so the notion of paying attention to the recently released RoboCop game, when I've never bothered to pay attention to its series, much less its cinematic decade, struck me as a bit of a silly notion. But he asked if I wanted to try it, and I've long since learned that life is more fun if you try to say yes to things, so I said yes. We played for a few hours, and then we all went our separate ways. I had to get back home to pack for a honeymoon that I was leaving for the next day, which I've only just returned from, but I'm writing all of this as soon as I reasonably could after my return because I thought about RoboCop Rogue City literally every day that I was away. The day after I returned, I saw those same friends and played a little bit more to confirm that yes, holy shit, I need to talk about this game, and as I'm writing this intro at 3 AM on a Thursday, I've finished the game only minutes ago. And while I don't think I'd go so far as to call RoboCop Rogue City my game of the year, I would happily call it a game that just has so much going for it. Hence, not knowing where to start. Let's try starting with the raw absurdity of its creation. RoboCop Rogue City was published in November of 2023 and was developed by Teyon Studios, which I'm going to wager that you've never heard of, mostly because they're a Polish studio where functionally zero of my audience is, but also because their catalog is a little bit all the fuck over the place. For example, late in 2011, they released Heavy Fire Afghanistan, an on-rails arcade shooter. It released to a handful of fairly reviews, and in January of 2012, it was rapidly followed up by 101 Pinball World. Riveting. With that in mind, it would be all too easy to look at Teyon and just assume that they're a shovelware or a bloatware company, that their MO is just to make as many cheap games as possible just to inflate some local e-store, but I don't think that would be right. Because in 2014, they developed Rambo the video game, yes, that's what it's called, and this seems to have been the start of a new life for Teyon, based on breathing new life into American IPs from the 80s. You cannot find Rambo the video game on Steam, but you can find their 2019 release Terminator Resistance, which released to, quite frankly, phenomenal reviews. And almost 4 years to the date later, they released RoboCop Rogue City. And at 95% positive, that's about as good as you're gonna get. But the absurdity of a Polish AA studio finding their ticket to fame doesn't just end with them making good games based off of American 80s cinema, because RoboCop Rogue City isn't just a standalone game or a reboot of the series, it's a direct sequel to RoboCop 2. And that means it sneaks onto the timeline to sit just before RoboCop 3. And if that alone isn't absurd enough, how about we make the main villain the brother to the villain from RoboCop 1? No, not Clarence Boddicker, this guy, Emil Antonowski. You remember him, right? He fell in the sludge and got hit with a car? Classic Emil. And this is far from the only time where RoboCop Rogue City pulls directly from their movies. RoboCop 2's nuke is still a massive problem on the streets of Detroit. Delta City is still a hot-button political theme, and we even visit the same steel mill where Alex Murphy gets RoboCopped in the first movie. All of this places the game into this absurd state where you need to know so much about two movies from 30 years ago if you want to understand all of its themes and events. But far more absurd is the fact that RoboCop Rogue City is an undeniably well-made game. The game starts mid-action. Some gangers have taken control of a media tower in the heart of the city, and we can't wait for SWAT to show, so RoboCop makes the call.
We're going in. Get tactical, Lewis.
This is Anne Lewis, by the way. She's been RoboCop's partner since the start of the first movie. You remember her, right? They make their way into the tower, and it's here that the game shows off its first trick. It feels incredible to play. RoboCop starts with a gun called the Auto 9, and in a move akin to Dead Space, really gives you no reason to ever look for a different weapon, despite the bad guys you clear out dropping plenty, because the Auto 9 just feels really good to use. It's crisp, it's clean, the sound is satisfying, and the sound is augmented by the fact that the headshots in this game have this visceral, crunchy squelch to them. And since every headshot is a critical one-shot instant kill, the game really incentivizes you to just shoot as many people in the face as possible, since that's the quickest way to dispatch an enemy, and also gives the dopamine release that comes with the headshot sound effect. What's most interesting about the Auto 9, though, is that it's the only gun in the game that doesn't run out of ammo. And this combo really stands out to me, because typically I would associate one-shot kill opportunities with games that are resource management forward, where carefully using each round is paramount to your success or survival. But Rogue City gives you both unlimited ammo and no reason to ever not give every bad guy a firearms-based decapitation. Literally, you can inspect corpses or just see them as they drop in slow motion and count how many have lost their identity. Sorry, that was kind of a weird way of putting that. I'm sure it won't be a core theme later though, let's move on. Now, these gangers, called the Torchheads, have taken the tower because they're trying to send a message to the new guy in town, a mysterious figure rumored to have big plans and deep pockets. So naturally, all of the gangs in Old Detroit are vying for his attention, and the Torchheads are using the tower's broadcast hardware and some hostages to send their message. Riding the elevator up to the broadcast room, one of the goons will use the lift's onboard television to taunt RoboCop, and after the video fades, we can see the reflection of a face that isn't ours. Clearing a storage area, we're caught off guard by a bomb planted under the walkway, and while there's no physical damage, it seems that the blast has done something to our mind. The world around us glitches, and a woman that the subtitles name Ellen Murphy speaks, and her son, James Murphy, responds. We listen to them talk as we clear the studio backrooms, and if you've been paying attention, you'll put together that what you're hearing is your family. More specifically, we're hearing memories of conversations long since past. Clear the final room, however, and as one final goon with one final hostage starts making demands, the voice of Ellen Murphy is given form as we hallucinate the face of our wife over that of the hostage. We freeze, unable to act, unable to comprehend, to cope with what we're seeing. And this is the game's second trick. If RoboCop Rogue City was just a really fun arcade shooter with fun stompy sound effects when you walk and an exploding jam jar effect every time a bad guy gets domed, that would be enough to be fun. Instead, RoboCop Rogue City also demands deep, emotional, dare I say, philosophical introspection about what it means to be a person, what it means to deal with trauma and the loss of autonomy and identity, and trying to find some definition of yourself for yourself in a world that wants clear black and white in a place where that just can't exist. Because at its core, RoboCop is a very cyberpunk story. Our first exposure to this is with Max Becker. Returning to the precinct after the media tower, we're introduced to the head of security concepts from Omni Consumer Products, and we watch along with him to an interview conducted by Samantha Ortiz, a news reporter that had been held at the tower. The question held over the public is, can RoboCop be trusted? After all, we just watched him freeze during a highly important moment. Becker states that the glitch was an isolated incident only to portray that notion right after, stating to us that it's a repeating pattern, that these glitches need to be attended to, and it's here that the game continues that second trick. RoboCop goes to therapy. And look, okay, I know that that's one hell of a sentence, but let me play in this space for a moment. Dr. Olivia Blanche is a police psychologist who specializes in treating PTSD in police officers. She remarks that while Omni Consumer Products, we'll get back to them, has spared no expense on RoboCop's mechanical side, very little attention has been paid to what's still human, and giving some care to that might help. We undergo a handful of sessions with Blanche, taking place after every other mission or so, and what I find most fascinating about these sessions is how it feels like real, genuine thought went into them. Because honestly, it would have been really easy to just lean into the heavy thunking steps and the satisfying gunplay and just make RoboCop Rogue City into a run-of-the-mill arcade-style shooter, but it is a far, far more interesting game than that. Because the first question Blanche asks is, who are you? Are you Alex Murphy or are you RoboCop? And what I love about this is that the question is so fascinating given the context, because you might have ideas about who this character is, but that has to contend with the fact that you are this character. It's a first-person game, after all. I think the reason why this element of the game works so well is because it invites the player to reflect and consider more complicated aspect of the game and the story. It invites, quite frankly, it firmly insists that you spend time thinking about the deeper elements. During one of the sessions, RoboCop will state that OCP cut him off from his family, and Blanche will ask how you feel about that. It's clear that his family remains a present element in his mind, but now you have to make the active decision to decide how you feel about that. The most impactful moment comes during the final session, where Blanche will both ask if you remember how you defined yourself at the start of the game, and how would you define yourself now. For me, that answer changed, and a large part of why it changed is because my own perception of the character changed via my hand in controlling their actions. Which brings us to the other part of how you're evaluated. For each of the game's main missions you complete, you'll gain a fresh 1,000 experience, and for every 1,000 experience you gain, you acquire a skill point to be spent on a handful of different traits. Each trait does something passively per level, as well as at certain point thresholds. So, one mission, one upgrade. Makes sense until you do the mental math and realize how little you're actually going to be able to unlock compared to your full potential. But don't you worry, because the game has yet another trick. During each mission, in between head-blasting bad guys and tossing out one-liners, the game is filled with side missions. Now, these missions are honestly pretty okay, and usually find some excuse to give you some combat. Woman lost her cat? Go find it in the basement. Also, there's some torch heads in the basement, and they shoot first, so kill them too. They don't have anything to do with the cat, they just happen to be there. And doing all of these side missions will alter the public perception of RoboCop, which matters, a little bit, I think, for the endings. But mostly what they do is give you more experience. And it all collects into this very interesting system where by taking some time to just be a good person, really just be a human, to take some time and help an old woman or try to set a kid on a better path by understanding the difficulties of a friend, you can become a far more effective policeman. Which, wow, what a very interesting system. I wonder if it's intended to say anything specific or not. Just kidding, I don't wonder at all, because it says what it says regardless of intention. It's a notion that's seemingly even supported by RoboCop as a franchise, because at multiple times across the IP we're exposed to the three main directives that RoboCop seemingly operates under. These being to protect the public trust, protect the innocent, and uphold the law, notably in that order. It's almost like the game is really trying to drive home the idea that having the public trust and have faith in their local police is a way more important thing than just unfeelingly following the letter of the law. But I want to use that notion to springboard into some of the darker concepts explored in RoboCop, because despite the game and the movies having a variety of tones, one of the more subtle ones is horror. There's a lot going on in this game that I consider scary. Some of it is very literal, and we'll get to that, but much more of it is systemic, I suppose. And it all starts with OCP, or Omni Consumer Products. I don't think I've fully introduced them yet. They're the corporation that owns RoboCop and the Detroit Police Force. And if either of those facts feels weird to you, good, that's because it should. There's this element to statehood called the monopoly on force, or monopoly on violence. It's a fairly complex bit of political philosophy, and while I'm not really what you would call a political philosophy guy, I'm perfectly capable of telling you that the basis of the idea is that the state should be the only entity within the state to conduct violence, or be allowed to choose who is able to conduct it. Failure to do so essentially indicates that a state is unable to maintain control of its own land, populace, organizations, etc. So when RoboCop opens and a mega-corporation owns a police force, one that is often responsible for a high count of non-judicial killings, that is some genuine systemic horror. Furthermore, however, it means that the same megacorp also owns RoboCop, literally owns the entity that is RoboCop, which makes that opening question from Dr. Blanche mean so much more. Is RoboCop a construct that just happens to use a bit of human flesh, or is Alex Murphy the living mechanical property of the corporation that reconstructed him? One of the large debates within the game is who is RoboCop actually? Is it a police cyborg, or is he the mechanized remains of Alex Murphy? It's this same loss of autonomy that provides the baseline of another type of horror, one often seen in these cyberpunk genres, that being the disposability of human life, the tendency to lose oneself to the same technology or chrome that was supposed to save us. There was a remake of the first RoboCop movie in 2014, and while it's generally understood that it's hard to replicate or replace the original 1987 release, the 2014 version is really good in its own rights, and at times, I would argue, even surpasses the original. The primary scene in which this is done is the scene where Alex Murphy first wakes up as RoboCop and demands to see... Let me just show you the scene. Content warning for some body horror.
No. Holy Christ. Holy Christ. Holy Christ, there's nothing left.
It's an incredible scene, watching individual parts of the mechanical body slowly being removed until, in Alex's own words, there's nothing left. Even parts of his brain have had to be reconstructed, but he's told that he's the one in control. If he's the one in control, he says, he wants to die, and suddenly, he's not in control at all. This notion is compounded in the following scene, as we see this new RoboCop involved with a combat test, wherein the same scientist explains to OCP viewers that
when the machine fights, the system releases signals into Alex's brain, making him think he's doing what our computers are actually doing. I mean, Alex believes right now he is in control, but he's not. It's the illusion of free will.
It's this loss of autonomy, this loss of identity that I find so wholly terrifying, both from a personal, empathetic standpoint, but also from a conceptual, systemic standpoint. Because either OCP has installed a living, self-aware mechanical slave, or they have chosen to automate non-judicial killings to robots that may or may not feel anything resembling human emotion. And that second option is entirely possible because they've already done it. The ED-209 is a fully automated, mechanized, mech, and it's what the OCP-funded police force used to help control the streets. They're a fairly fallible system, however, because at least twice we can see the 209s malfunction and kill unintended innocent targets. More than just their error rate, however, the 209s are programmed to speak in both predetermined automated sentences, but also in literal animalistic sounds. During combat, or while intimidating targets, the 209 will scream out in tiger roars, and when one of the models falls down the stairs in the early movie, it squeals out like a wounded pig. Which means not only does the ED-209 represent a non-feeling, non-human police element, it represents an element of the police that is literally designed around an animalistic presentation. And the only thing worse than a police force that actively dehumanizes the people within its jurisdiction is a police force that actively dehumanizes itself. Because it is impossible to form a connection with a robot that roars at you as it guns you down. The greatest sense of horror within the game, however, comes from what I would call its standout mission, Ghosts from the Past. After sustaining a wild injury in the field, the whole world begins to shift around us. Voices come to us, the mannequins that make up the mall's only occupants stalk us, watch us, do not let us escape them. We cannot trust our eyes, as doors and hallways repeat on themselves, all the while time passes in unpredictable ways. The brilliance of the level, of course, is that I do not think for one moment that these voices that we encounter are memories. That simply wouldn't make sense. Lewis would never say these things to us. Rather, I believe these words are the internalized feelings of Alex Murphy himself, fully aware and cognizant of what he is now, with a deep, hidden hatred for what he's become, thoughts that only now, alone and beaten in a vulnerable state, can come to the surface. And because Alex Murphy hates himself, he cannot imagine a world where those around him also do not hate him. It's a level that brings us face to face with the concepts of self-loathing and self-destruction, in a method that I find eerily similar to Cyberpunk 2077's notion of cyberpsychosis, an inability to separate fantasy and its falsities from reality, brought on by malfunctioning mechanical elements, or rather, those mechanical elements costing us our identities. The only thing that grounds him, brings him back to himself, is the memories, the true, genuine memories of the words of the people that care about him. Because we're at our strongest when we're together. Eventually, it all fades, and there is triumph in the moment, but the experience has stuck with me through my entire time thinking about this game and writing the script, because to me, RoboCop Rogue City has managed to do the thing that the original movies were never able to. They managed to make RoboCop feel like a human. And look, I'm not saying the movies don't try, or that they don't tease the concept, that they don't in some way acknowledge the loss of self, the destroyed identity of Alex Murphy, but they never really it only ever feels like they acknowledge it. They never let the notion speak for itself, never let it have the weight that kind of concept deserves. In the first movie, RoboCop revisits his old family home, only to find that his wife and son have seemingly abandoned him, greeted only by the automated voice of the computer telling him that the property is now up for sale. With the recognition of what has been taken from him, he's clearly bothered, suffering some kind of deep emotional turmoil, and in the next scene we see him killing a bunch of bad guys set to triumphant music, like it's going out of style. Maybe there's something cut from YouTube's version, I mean plenty is, but I'm not so sure in this case because the same issue seems to make the rounds in RoboCop 2 as well. There's a scene in the second movie where RoboCop, he essentially stalks his wife and kid. I hate using that word though because the scene clearly lacks the predatory nature that comes inherent to stalking. It's much more so akin to the emotional state of damage and vulnerability that comes with needing the attention of someone who's died. Only here, those people yet live, but a death-like separation exists anyways, because how could it not? The scene compounds with RoboCop specifically being told that he's not allowed to continue this behavior, that he's not allowed to go see his wife until she makes the call to come see him. Except he just tells her that her husband is dead and that he doesn't know her. And the movie goes out of its way to showcase that RoboCop is clearly lying, and instead of ever having any sort of emotional payoff, that's it. Ellen Murphy is never addressed again beyond the first 15 minutes of the second movie, so much so to the point that she's not even in RoboCop 3. Like, god fucking damn it. No wonder this movie and scene are written and shot with all of the emotional availability of 300. Frank fucking Miller wrote the script. God damn you, Miller. And so, when the game forces you as the player to confront the question of who is RoboCop, what is this character, and when it makes absolutely sure that you understand the deeply embedded emotional trauma that comes with not just losing your own identity, but losing the people you care about the most for in the same event, holy shit, I was not ready for what this game was going to be bringing to the table. And it all comes back to the fact that this game even existing is so absurd, that it being this unpredictable masterpiece is so absurd, because not only does this game present itself so well, it manages to do so while showing incredible regard for the films that serve as its foundation. Our second level after the Media Tower sees us scouring the city of Old Detroit for information on Soot, the leader of the Torchheads, the guy from the broadcast. We're looking for him for a lead on where we can find the new guy. Well, eventually we find Soot, and in doing so, we find the new guy, one Wendell Antonowski, who, despite being seemingly related to Emil, it looks suspiciously like Hans Gruber from everyone's favorite Christmas movie, Die Hard. Regardless, just the name drop alone is a huge deal. Emil's not a big character, so even if it was just this one-off connection, that would be its own cool thing, but it's not just that. Peter Weller makes his return as the vocal talent for RoboCop despite not having been involved with the IP, I believe, since the release of RoboCop 2 in 1990. And I love that Teyon went for that casting because it adds so much credibility to the performance to hear that same voice deliver the same lines. The police precinct is a near-perfect shot-for-shot remake of the precinct from the RoboCop films, and whenever the game needs a cutscene for the area, such as pulling into the precinct or leaving it via the garage, the rendered cutscenes are essentially just animated reshoots of their original cinematic counterpieces. The individual characters within the game are given the same level of attention and care because even bound by the restrictions of their fairly rigid models, you can still clearly see the original actors that the character models in the game are based off of. Like, just look at Sergeant Reed and tell me this isn't a near-perfect animated recreation of Robert Duquesne. They even got the licensing for the original music, which means when the moment gets big, you have that same decades-old RoboCop theme with those same horns, the same emotional boom, that same sense of raw, uncontained triumph, that sentiment of I told you there would be trouble and now I am the trouble. I don't know how I'm supposed to hear this song and not feel incredible. And yes, there's all these big ways that the game declares itself in massive size 72 bolded impact font, I am a love letter to 80s cinema, but it's in one particular bit so easy to walk right past that I really know that the game is genuine. There's this scene in the opening of the first RoboCop movie where a team is showing off the capabilities of their new product, the ED-209. But the mech malfunctions and absolutely butchers one of the board members, throwing his corpse onto the model of a city kept in the boardroom. You visit this office yourself in the game, and the same model of the same city is right there, right where it should be. And while it looks untouched and pristine, that's because it's been replaced. You can find the original blood-spattered, corpse-imprinted model here in this closet, hidden away, where OCP tried to bury the evidence of its flaws and wrongdoing. It's the small things, you know? Where you'd really have to love something to get details this specific. I think at its heart, that's what makes RoboCop Rogue City such a special thing. Not just that its studio made a good game, but that they clearly love the media and the medium that they're working in here. That they had clear respect for what came before them, but also the confidence to not just completely rely on it. That they were still able to push that media even further. A Polish AA studio, most known, if known at all, for producing low-quality shovelware, making a sequel to not just a 30-plus-year-old film, but a film that is already a sequel in itself, and making a new, fresh, genuine installation into a much-beloved IP that is not only a good game, but genuinely one of the best I think I've ever played. How absurd. How unexpectable. But what a masterpiece it is. Welp, by my count, that just about does it. As long as I don't mess it all up, this should be the 31st, at least here in the States. All you Aussies will have to let me know how 2024 has been so far. I know a few of you watch my videos. This has been a really good year for me, and that largely involved you guys. This channel is still a small thing in the scope and scale of YouTube as a platform, but I've had a deep love of writing for as long as I can remember, and I've been trying to find some way to establish a voice with it for years. It has been deeply rewarding to see so many people resonate with the videos, comment their thoughts to my work, and directly support me and my content on Patreon. I wish you all the very best in the year to come. Stay close to the people who care for you, and be near to the people you care for. It's the best place to be. So, from me and mine to you and yours, I wish you happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, and a wondrous New Year. Thank you so much.